I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius Podcast. It is crazy to think that we are in season 7. I just still can't get used to that. We're in season 7. It's crazy. I'm here with my co-host, Teresa Kenny, and we're also here with Caitlin Estes. Now, Caitlin and I, we got a chance to talk a little bit before hitting record. We share something in common. We're both a fertility care practitioner. So understanding the body and understanding our cycle is deeper than just the physical. So we're going to get into that today. Caitlin is the owner of Woven Natural Fertility Care. And she also has written a book, which we're going to talk a lot more about today. So Caitlin, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to be among other like-minded women who care about women and their bodies.
Yes, definitely. Okay, Caitlin, now we know that, of course, our fertility cycle is a biological vital sign of health. We can look to our cycle and make sense of our hormones and make sense of our health, of our mood, of our feminine superpowers, like what we like to call it. But for you, Caitlin, you had this experience while being a fertility care practitioner that kind of an enlightening about also the spiritual aspect of our cycle and of our womanhood. So when we interview our interviewees, we like to jump right in. So Caitlin, I'm going to ask you, like, what was that epiphany moment in yourself and viewing your own womanhood, but also in working with your female clients when it comes to thinking about how we're also spiritual and how the cycle, in a way, is very much a spiritual experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, it actually began before I was a fertility care practitioner. So when my husband and I got engaged and we were starting to think about family planning for ourselves, I looked into options. I personally did not want to be on birth control, so I was looking into alternatives and what were they? I mean, I knew nothing, So I went out there trying to find what's available and stumbled into the world of fertility awareness methods. And so I started learning the Creighton model system, my, fiance and I at the time, and we started learning that together. And I was learning so much about my body, so much about cycles and ovulation and things that I just honestly never knew about. And so I was telling my friends and telling the ladies that I was in grad school with and ladies I went to church with. And I'm like, did you know this? Did you know that? And the answer was the same. No, I don't know that. I didn't know that. And so we started out with this very common lack of knowledge. But the interesting thing to me was every time those conversations would start out with the practical. Why do I have PMS? Why would God, make me in this way? It's kind of getting to that deeper place. Like dealing with the practical issues always brought out those questions that were more spiritual based. Like, why would God create me like this? Is this how it's supposed to be? And I just became very aware that God really mattered in our design. God really mattered in these areas of women's health and fertility. And so that's actually what inspired me to become a fertility care practitioner. And so I did that process just a little less than 10 years ago. And then I began working with clients. And to me, that's one of my favorite parts, is getting to that deeper place. Yes, I want to educate, empower women. I want to make sure they feel super confident in how to make informed decisions about their cycles and family planning and fertility treatments and all that kind of stuff. But when we get to go to the deeper place and talk about why this matters to their life, their marriage, who they are as a woman, their relationship with God, like that's my absolute favorite part. So at some point, I started having this stirring in my soul, like, there's no way that the women of the world who deserve this message can get it just through one-on-one sessions with, through Woven Natural Fertility Care. We've got to have more. And so I started thinking about the potential of the book And I really do feel like it was God inspired and his work from beginning to the end to make it happen. But that's kind of what led me to that point in thinking about actually writing a book about it.
It's awesome. The book is called Woven Well, and I have a copy, and I brought it home last night to read, and it's still at home, and I meant to bring it back with me. But what I want to say is it's a beautiful book. It's it's a very simple book. And I think that is important. One of the nurse practitioners in my office, Caitlin, who's very interested in women's health, and she's had her own journey. She saw it on my shelf and she said, "Hey, I want to read this." And I was like, "Yeah, take it." I'm like, I'll need it back because we're going to be interviewing the author. So I'm like, she's like, "No, I think." She looked at it, she's like, "I think I can read it in, at one night." And she did. And she came back and what she loved about it was the simplicity, the case studies kind of in it, but also really mentioned the fact that tying in kind of the spiritual aspect of the human person was very, very helpful to her to really put things together in a way she said she never got in school, and really brought up also that, like the sex education that she got in high school was just terrible. And, it was all about the fact that sex created bad things. And I think that's really unfortunate about our sexuality, even though there's been this cry for people to get educated and sex education should be given to everybody, but yet it still is wrapped in a negativity then, because all we talk about is the negative aspects of what occur, and what you have to risk mitigate out of it. Instead of the design of the human person and the human body being made this way for a great good, not just for the whole society and creation of other human people, but a great good in terms of relationship. And we talk about that. I feel like the Hormone Genius, that really the value of the person is, we're all like deeply created with love, and each should be respected. But also the value of us is in relationship with another person. Mm-hmm. And all of us thrive in relationship. All of us want to be loved and to be loved, to give love, and all that relationship creates goodness. So my point is, like, she was able to very quickly in that beautiful book be able to say, that was very helpful that you were able to take the physical, but entwine it into the whole person so that you really can put the whole thing together and be like, oh, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I guess just, in your mind, like, why was that so important to you to make sure that people, and you said it before, but like the practical is what we all kind of look for, I think, in the instant social media stuff, right? Like, what can I do to get better, cycles and less PMS? But we know they're not looking sometimes for that other aspect, but when that hits them, it changes the way we see ourselves and the identity of who we are. And I think that's just incredible.
Well, I'm so glad that the nurse practitioner at your office felt that way and that she did feel like it was so approachable. That is absolutely the goal. My hope with the book from the very beginning is that it would be something that any woman of reproductive years could pick up and read and feel seen and feel like they're not in over their heads. I'm a big fan of making sure women know that they are extremely capable of understanding their bodies. With the right education, they can do it. Any woman can do it. I fully believe that. And so I'm really thrilled that that was her take on it and that she felt like it was something that was super approachable. So thanks for sharing that. That means a lot to me personally. But I think that the female body is such a beautiful example of how we are designed to be in relationship with others. It's this constant reminder because we are dependent on others. We have these moments where we may need some additional support. Now, I don't mean like we can't do anything on our own or we're incapable or anything like that, but I just mean we are very aware of our vulnerability as women, and we are very aware of our relationships with others, as mothers, as wives. These are life-defining relationships of ours that make a difference. And so I think there's actually a little bit of part of the book there, but it was inspired by the book The Dignity of Dependence by Leah Sargent. She is fantastic, and if you ever get a chance to read that book, I highly recommend it. But it's just that reminder that we are intended to be in relationship with one another. And why do we know that? Well, we are made in the image of God. And God has designed us for communion with Him, to be in relationship with Him. And so it actually means something. It actually proclaims a message to the world. And this is true for women who are mothers. It's true for women who are married. It's true for single women who are not mothers. It's true for every single one of us. It's not about what our body could do. It's not about just that potential. It's about, well, let me rephrase that. It's not about whether or not our body does those things, but it's about our potential to do that. That proclaims the message in and of itself. And so it is beautiful, it is meaningful, and it does bear that image of God in the world.
I think this is a really important conversation. Just this, I love the title of your book, Woven Well, but just how we're all interwoven. Our parts of us are interwoven, And so just as when we begin to understand and know that because we're made in the image of God, and we see that beautifully within our cycle, just the difference between men and women, Teresa and I love to call this like epiphany of understanding bioevangelism, as though our body is evangelizing to ourselves because we're made in the image. So we love talking about bioevangelism, and we see it all the time. And so do you, Caitlin. Like,
Yes.
when we talk to women about their cycle, we don't necessarily even need to talk about the Lord or anything. It's this spiritual experience. And often they don't understand why or how. But the number of times that I've worked with clients, I teach them about their cycle, and then they start asking, because how can we not? It's like when we understand like gravity, or it's like how when we understand how there's reason to how far away the earth is from the sun. And if we were any closer or further away, we would either burn it to a crisp or, freeze. It's that wonder and awe that forces us to ask ourselves, why is there such rhythm to these things? Because if it were any different, we would be burnt to a crisp. That's the idea, the wonder and awe that I think that gets activated in people and women and in husbands. You've seen it.
Yes.
And in husbands, especially the husbands, when they're sitting and they're listening, they're like, what the heck? Like, there's a reason for all of these things, these emotional things and these struggles, or even the good times and the energies and her health and whatnot. There's so much wonder now wrapped into the cycle. And how can we not ask spiritual questions of like,
Yes.
How does this happen? How does it come to be? Okay. With that, well, what are your thoughts? I just kind of went on a rampage.
Well, actually, something I was thinking as you said that is I had a phone call this week with a woman who I'd never met before, but she was talking about how she had been diagnosed with PCOS. And so she went online and she was trying to find all this information, and she was just taking it all in. She was listening to podcasts, she was reading articles, she was following all these accounts. And she started to realize that all of this material was basically treating her body like an object to be optimized. And she felt like something was wrong with that, but she couldn't really put her finger on what. And I think that's that stirring in us that certainly there's got to be more. Certainly we are more than just an object to be optimized or a machine to be turned on and off when we want it to use it, that sort of thing. And I think that's what you're talking about, that awareness that there's something there, there's something more. And we hope that it's good and beautiful and that there is meaning and purpose there. But a lot of us doubt that it's possible because we take in all those resources that are out there, and we hear this message all the time about the function of our reproductive system and how we ought to treat it and what we ought to do to it and how we ought to manipulate it. And when you hear that over and over and over again, you start to think about the spiritual and you're like, no, certainly. I'm digging too deep to try to make it spiritual. But I completely agree with you. It is there. It is intertwined. It is beautiful. And I think even when we look at like ancient civilizations, they knew that there was something more. Even skeptics today who aren't sure that God is real, they'll still dedicate time to meditation and they'll talk about trusting the universe. Like they know that there is something more. And I think it's because our bodies proclaim God, the existence of God. Our bodies bear the image of God. So our very DNA points to that relationship there. And so, yeah, we can't help but experience it when we start digging a little bit deeper. Yeah.
I was with a patient today, Caitlin, and it was a mom, and she said, "Can I ask you a question about my friend's daughter?" She said, "I feel like there's an epidemic of 14-year-olds being put on birth control pills for
Yes.
heavy and painful periods or periods every 2 weeks." And I kind of shook my head. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong in that. I think oftentimes, like, what happens is just if someone's at the point where they've actually committed to going to a doctor for a period problem, they're going to get offered birth control because that's just what doctors have been trained to do. And we just had that conversation about why, especially at that age of development, if we think about the reproductive system and that it takes 4 to 6 years on average for the full system to fully mature. And then in the midst of that, you literally put a girl on these hormones that completely shut down that aspect of their endocrine system. Like how unfortunate that is, and how we really may not understand kind of what the long-term effects of that are too. And what for me is such a frustration is that could have been dealt with in a way completely different. They just don't offer it. And she just wanted to make sure that she could tell her friends that she could send them to me and I could help them with their menstrual problems without that option. And I'd say 100%, of course you can, because there really is. And this is why these books, like your book, Woven Well, are so important, because it's not just the introduction to your body and how it works, but it's also the idea that your body should be naturally treated in a certain way and it should work well. Like medicine should be able to treat and help it work well. So in your experience of, and maybe you can even share a story, like what have you seen when women understand their bodies and they know they want to treat it as a good, not a negative, how can they make better decisions about their health then?
Yes, great question. There's actually an entire section of the book about that. What we believe about our bodies is going to directly impact how we treat it, how we love it, how we respect it, and how we expect others to treat it, love it, and respect it as well. And so that really impacts things like relationships, for one, but it also impacts our healthcare and our expectations going into that. When you think about hormones as being these annoying things that make you feel angry or sad or cause acne or weight gain or those kind of things, then it's like, why do I need that? Let me just shut that down. It doesn't make any sort of a difference. But when you are able to see that hormones are actually incredible gifts to females, all human beings, but especially in this context, females, and how they help us now to be creative, energetic, maybe restful, maybe reduce anxiety. So they have all these positive benefits, and then positive benefits long-term in life to help prevent things like osteoporosis or cardiovascular disease. So you start to see all the good that's related to them. And you start to realize as well that when they're imbalanced or something's going wrong with them, they're actually communicating that. So they're giving us this helpful information that we can use to treat it, get to that root cause, address it, and have an overall improved quality of life and health. Then there's this new respect. And we no longer are like quick to want to shut it down. Instead, we really want to preserve those hormones because they are for our good, like health-wise, mentally, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Our hormones are there to benefit us. It's almost like God knew what he was doing when he designed us. Exactly. So we want to work with that instead of shutting them down. And I think it all starts with that perspective. I was talking with a mom the other day. We had a book tour event in Nashville, and she said, I didn't know any better. I put my daughter on birth control because she was, in the corner in a ball dealing with painful periods. And I said, of course you did, because you don't want pain for your daughter. But now you know so much more, and you know that pain is actually a sign. And so she's leading the way in her community to make sure that other women, other moms know that this is not normal and it shouldn't be treated as normal by a medical professional, but you really should have the option to get to that underlying condition and treat that directly. I talked with a woman once who was put on birth control at the age of 14, and her cervix never finished developing. So then 15 years later, she'd been married for a few years. She started to try to have a family, and she was having a lot of losses. And it took longer than it should have, of course, but ultimately they discovered it was because the cervix never fully developed. But how many moms and daughters are told about that potential when they're put on birth control at 13, 14, 15 years old? So education really does make a difference.
Absolutely. Okay, so Caitlin, when you're meeting with your clients, how do you bring up the interweaving of your physical and your spiritual? Is it more so just because you can't separate it and it impacts that person no matter what? Like we were talking about bioevangelism, or do you gain that trust and have conversations? And if so, what does that look like?
It really is unique to every woman. A lot of times it will naturally come up. Something that happens will spark a question. And I talk, even in our introductory class, I will talk about how looking at the body and digging a little bit deeper will stir up questions. So deeper questions. And so they know from the beginning that they can ask those questions. They can verbalize new thoughts and fears and hopes and struggles. And so I do it's my prayer to create that environment where they know they can bring it up. And so we can talk openly about that. But I'm also not afraid to ask a question. So especially if I feel like it has hit one of those deeper nerves or deeper places in the soul, I may ask about that. How does that feel in your heart, in your soul? What does that make you think? What does that make you feel? Because a lot of women just need the opportunity. It's there, but maybe they didn't even realize it was there, but they're asked the question, given the permission to explore that a little bit, and then it really comes to the top. I want to be clear too that we work with all types of women. So this is not we're trying to convert women to, a particular anything like that. But it's more so, I really do believe that God is involved in this process. And so wherever you come in, if you are open to that, the Lord will meet you there. Absolutely will meet you there. And wherever he takes you, that's up to the Holy Spirit, wherever he takes you from there. But he will absolutely meet you and transform that experience and provide healing that is hopefully physical, but is beyond that too.
Caitlin, can you give an example of something that might get stirred up? Like if you're having a conversation, like often if I say this, then this could be a thing that gets stirred up. Can you walk us through a couple of those examples?
Gosh, there really are so many. I mean, so many different possibilities, but one that immediately comes to mind is when a couple is thinking about avoiding pregnancy or trying to conceive. It could be either one, but let's use avoiding pregnancy. And they will be very clear that they are strongly avoiding pregnancy and they do not want to conceive and they cannot conceive right now and very focused on that, which is great. We can absolutely help them do that with total confidence. Creighton, which is what we teach at Woven, is extremely effective. So we don't have any issues with that. But sometimes, especially if they are emphasizing it every single meeting, sometimes I'll ask, why? That's a simple question. But what it starts out with is maybe the financial or the job situation or career goals or something along those lines. But underneath it, what comes out a lot of times is fear. Fear that we won't have enough, fear that we won't be enough, fear that our kids won't have what we want them to have. And so when that fear is the cause, then we can have an incredible conversation about the Lord's presence and the Lord's guidance there. Because if God is calling you to it, then God will see you through it, whatever that may be. It doesn't mean, oh, people should be trying to have kids all the time, anytime. It doesn't mean that. It means that if God invites you to grow your family and you have a long list of reasons why you don't think it's a good choice, you can trust in the creator of life, that God knows that. And you can have a peace in that and a trust in that you may not have even considered before when you've got that laundry list in front of you of why you wouldn't plan it during this time. And so that's just one example, but it comes up and we're able to see how God is involved in every single woman's story, whether they're trying to conceive or it's a woman who is single and trying to understand her cycles for the first time. This is a story in the book, but it's also a podcast episode if you go back and listen. One of my clients had extremely long cycles, and she was diagnosed with PCOS, and she was dealing with some of the health conditions that can affect that. And she just had a really negative view of her body. And that ended up impacting how she treated her body, how she loved it, how she respected it, in ways that she could acknowledge and in ways that she couldn't. And so just starting to work together and for me to normalize the fact that a lot of women have long cycles doesn't mean we're not going to do anything about it, but it's also not a reflection of who she is. It doesn't mean that she's any less of a woman, that she's struggling to ovulate. It certainly doesn't impact her dignity in a negative way because our dignity comes from God. It cannot be taken away from us. It cannot be lost. That was a really healing experience for her, very transformative. And so she ended up using Creighton all through her single years. She ended up getting engaged and married and recently just welcomed a child into the world. But we've just talked about how God had been faithful to her to really call her to love her body in a new way. And that can be really difficult to do if we feel like our body isn't doing things like we think it should. I told somebody the other day that everyone is convinced that their cycle, especially when they start charting it on a chart, they can see it. Their cycle is different from everyone else's. Everyone else's is healthy and theirs is quote unquote messed up. But we all have such natural variety to it. And once you learn that's actually communicating something to you, it can be a very redeeming process almost in how we look at our own body and our design.
That's beautiful, Caitlin. I'm going to stop for a moment and just shout out to our podcast partner, We Heart Nutrition. And We Heart Nutrition, when you were talking about like young women and their cycles, or we were, mentioning that, I often think about how nutrients are so important for everyone. And we sometimes think about it for adults, but we don't think about our own kids sometimes at 14, 15, 16 and how they have not the best diets, which is not unusual. They may be suffering from lack of nutrients. So thinking about what you're putting in your body on a daily basis is really important. We love We Heart Nutrition. They make great quality bioavailable supplements. You can do a quiz online to find out which particular supplements are best for you. So check out We Heart Nutrition, and you can get 20% off with our code GENIUS. It's just GENIUS, and try them out. You will not regret it. They're a great company. Caitlin, as you were talking about your story in relationship to the girl that saw the dignity of herself with the long cycles, it made me think of a patient that I had years ago that, came from the rough side of the tracks. I mean, like rough life, lots of things that just was difficult, and including that in relationship to her own sexuality. And when she first came to see me, she really was pushing against kind of any sort of like, I guess you could say like sexual integrity in that sort of realm until she started to chart her cycles. And I watched someone who wasn't looking for it, wasn't expected, learn what her body was communicating to her, as you said, see the dignity of herself. And without me even saying anything, she started changing her behaviors. Even the way that she dressed changed. And I saw this over a period of a year. And I tell that story often because it was really a true testament that Charting your cycle allows you to see yourself and the identity of who you are in a way that you just didn't realize, as you said, as being made in the image of God. Even if you can't verbalize that statement, it's there because the truth is always within us. And I love that. I love that you don't necessarily have to bioevangelize in a way that speaks words about God. Like literally the biology evangelizes the truth of who we are. And I'm sure we could all have hundreds of stories that really tell that. It also makes me think about women on the opposite end who are having children. And I saw a patient this morning in tears, just with the stress of 4 little ones and how do I manage it all, and how do I keep myself healthy, and why do I feel anxious, and why do I have all this going on? And of course, I can help in what I can, but what's really important about women and why we are all talking here today is that women, through their own relationships with other women, help each other know that these experiences around family and having children and stresses and all that kind of stuff, they happen to everybody. It's different. Everyone's individual, but we all experience similar things, and why it's so important to communicate that with each other as women, and why these books like Woven Well is so important because they bring up conversation. So I can see in a situation like women coming together in a book study and it's starting to really unfold, like, how can we help each other? How can we serve each other as women to make these experiences not take away all suffering, because that doesn't happen, but learn to be compassionate and suffer with, right? To suffer with and to allow those experiences, at least to know we're not alone.
Yes, beautifully said. And I completely agree with all of that. And it's been really moving to me, honestly, so far. We've just begun the book tour that we're doing, and that'll end in September, October. And in that process, I've been able to talk to so many women that are not clients of Woven. And so I've not met them before. We've not had those previous conversations, so I don't know them really well, but they all have a story to share. And every single one of them matters. And so at the end of our time as a group in these events, they'll say, I'm buying a book for me, but I'm buying a book for my friend and my sister and my neighbor. And because it's exactly what you're saying, we want to all walk through this together. And when we get this good news and encouragement and something that helps us so much, I think for a lot of us, it is natural to want to bring others with us, link arms and say, okay, I'm going to bring my friends and my sisters up with me. And I think about what an impact that's going to have on the next generation. We all, the 3 of us, we did not have these resources when we were growing up. And now we're doing our small part to try to help change that. But I just like to think about all the women who are listening and how they are teaching their daughters, their nieces, the girls who are with them at church, like how that's changing for future generations. And it's so inspiring and empowering and encouraging that women really can cause this grassroots movement that empowers one another, and I think ends up changing the medical community in the process. Because when we raise our expectations, then my prayer is that the medical community will raise theirs as well. Women are really tired of being told the pill is their only option, or an IUD, or whatever hormonal birth control, that's the only option. Actually, we think there's others to be considered. We want to look a little bit deeper. We want to maintain and preserve these hormones. We don't want them to be shut down for 20, 30 years of our lives. And I have seen a response in that, even in something like the restorative reproductive medicine community, and seeing that response. And I'm encouraged for what could happen over the next 20 or 50 years.
Caitlin, this is such an important conversation, and we need as many voices as possible in our culture. I always think about 2 things. I think about the reticular activating system, RAS, okay? And we look for the things that we are thinking about. So like even just inviting somebody to ask themselves, how do I feel throughout the cycle? What do I notice throughout the cycle? Your brain starts to look for it, okay? Reticular activating system. So if even you're inviting a friend, maybe you're listening and you're charting your cycle, and you have some friends and you're like, I really want them to do this. A good invitation might be like, just did you know that there's actually a discharge, cervical mucus, mid-cycle, that indicates rising estrogen and ovulation's coming soon. That is like a little like blop, little light bulb moment for that person, because now they know the next time they go to the bathroom, they notice that, they're going to be able to associate that symptom with what's happening in their body. So, and the more we just kind of blip, 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 shares these little tidbits, because we're fighting this cultural war that but definitely often says no to the female body. So much so that we shut off our biological function of fertility, and that's a problem. So that's the culture we're in right now. So we need a lot of voices constantly sharing. And one more thing is I love the brain, Caitlin, a lot. It's so funny to me. It's funny. It's fascinating and funny. Both things are true. But there's also something that happens to the brain when it gets the same message over and over. If it gets a wrong message over and over, or if it gets the right message over and over, it believes what message it gets over and over. Is called the mere exposure effect. So as much exposure, whatever, it could be a complete lie. Our brain believes what it hears all the time, even subconscious things, the way we're raised, all of it. Okay. So I'm providing all of that. Mere exposure effect, reticular activating system, but those are fancy words that just mean talk about it, people.
Yes.
Talk about it. Just talk about it. So, Caitlin, what is like, a tip that you would like to share with our listeners here as we start wrapping up? Listeners who are charting, but also to the fertility care practitioners or fertility awareness instructors of whatever method. What are some tips that you might leave them with today?
Well, I may build on what you were saying, honestly. Throughout the book, every single chapter, we have little action steps. So they are things that you can do immediately to start paying more attention and make use of the information that you're getting here. The first section of the book focuses in on how your body works and what it's doing and hormones and how you can tell what's going on. And it's extremely educational and instructive. So you've got all these practical things that you can start doing. And then the book goes in a little bit deeper into more the spiritual side and why we're created the way that we are and what that means and why that's good. And then it transitions to how that impacts how we see the world, but how it impacts how we see women's health, our birth control choices, fertility treatments, that sort of thing. And then we address, the fact that we do not live in a perfect world. In fact, it is very broken. And so we've got this idealized version of things, but we live in the real world. So what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how can that actually transform the world in the long run? So all throughout, there are action steps that you can actually begin immediately. You don't have to have been charting your cycles or know anything about women's health before you start doing those. So just want to encourage them there with that. But I'm actually going to build as the tip of what you said, like talk about it. I really and truly believe that. I think those conversations can sometimes be more inspiring than the reel that we see on Instagram, because sometimes the information that we get there is helpful, and sometimes it's just trying to get your attention and keep your attention or get you to buy a product. So we have to be careful about what we take in, but having those conversations and finding a trusted voice, not just one, but like you were saying, multiple voices. So if you have maybe a podcast that you like to listen to and you trust, then bring it up in conversation with others. Hey, did you happen to hear this episode of The Hormone Genius? It was talking about how this hormone does this or that. And what do you think about that? Have you experienced that? Like, create community within these topics and then see, do they have a doctor that's worked really well with them for them? Or have they dealt with an issue before that they can actually get a little bit of a different treatment for? And you can actually suggest that to them. But it really normalizes the fact that we are dealing with hormones, or we may be postpartum, or we're on our period while we're leading this big presentation, or whatever it may be. And I think that helps counterbalance that message that you were talking about receiving, that this shouldn't be a part of our life. We should shut it down. It actually just holds us back. when we're in community with other women and we see, wow, we're all doing it. Like, it's tough, but also it's amazing. And we're all doing it together. And it's really empowering and encouraging. And so keep the conversation going and create that counterbalance of community out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. And, I ask every interviewee this last question, and you may have a hard time making a different. Basically, you answered it, but feel free to elaborate anymore. But what do you wish every woman knew about her hormone genius?
Yeah. That it is good and meaningful and essential and extraordinary. And that is a section of the book, but honestly, that it has so much potential for your growth and flourishing. And you may need the right guide along the way. You may need a community to help you. You may need an instructor to guide you. But there is so much good there for your thriving if you explore it a little bit more.
That's awesome. I'm excited for my daughters to read your book. They still have to read mine first. The hardest people to get to read your book is your own children. So just so you know, putting that out there. But Caitlin, tell us about where you can get the book and, your tour. Are you going to be in Nebraska or Iowa? Because that's where Jamie and I are. We'd love to meet you in person. But give us all the details and also your social media handles and about your fertility care, teaching, all of that.
Yeah. Well, a great place to go is wovenfertility.com because there are all the connections to social media. There's links to buy the book. You can buy Woven Well on Amazon, Christian Book, Moody Publishers, anywhere that Barnes & Noble, Target, you can get it anywhere that you would order books. But yes, we also have a podcast called Woven Well, so that's where the name came from. And it is a natural fertility podcast, so if listeners like The Hormone Genius, then they're going to feel very comfortable over at Woven Well as well. And our handles are all the same at Woven Fertility, so you can find us on Instagram or on YouTube. And I also write on a weekly basis on Substack, talking about this intersection between fertility and faith as well. So just little really short devotions and thoughts and connections here that we make between the two.
I'm so glad we were able to connect with you, Caitlin. I think, you had mentioned on Instagram, how we not cross paths before, right? Sometimes we see each other out there in the world doing such wonderful things, but to be able to connect together, again, to make this really almost like knitting us all together, it makes a stronger fabric so that we really can change the culture and help women everywhere. We really appreciate you coming on The Hormone Genius, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.